Shanghai GDG is a very interesting developer community.
I'm glad somebody has asked this question.
This is where the magic happens.
This is primarily a question and answer show. So if any of you out there would like to ask questions.
Hello everyone, welcome to Google Developers Live. Today, Claudio and I, Alan, are going to talk about writing your first .NET application using Google Drive.
Cool. So you probably know already because we had these videos in the past 2 weeks. We added a new quick start page to the Google Drive SDK documentation. It's at developers.google.com/drive/quickstart. On that page, you can find step-by-step instructions on how to write your first command line application for 5 supported languages.
6 languages
Actually
now.
6. We just added Go. So we have Java, Python, PHP, .NET, Ruby, and Go. And we have videos covering the quick start guide for Python and PHP. If you are interested in those, you can find them in our video library. But today, we're going to focus on .NET.
Yes.
And you're going to see that most of the introductory steps are the same. So if we go to the documentation page at developers.google.com/drive/quickstart, we will see that we have 5 steps to follow. The first one is enabling the Drive API. So to do that, we have to go to the APIs console.
That's correct. This has to be done with most of our Google APIs. So new developers or existing developers who already have a API project needs to go to the APIs console and enable the APIs we want to use. In our case, that would be the Drive API.
So we go to the APIs console, and if you have never created a project before, you will see this screen with a big blue button saying Create Project, which is what we're doing. We need to create a project to get credentials, right?
That's correct.
So we do Create Project. We wait for the project to be created, and then we have a list of services we want to enable. The only one we need is the Drive API. So we scroll down to Drive and click on it to enable it. So now the Drive API is enabled for this project, and we have a limit of 500,000 requests per day, which should be more than enough for today's sample.
For our first application, yes.
Yeah.
But
so
if you ever run out of quota, there's a form on the API console that you can fill, and we will review the quota request and grant access, grant more quota, or get back to you to get more information.
Okay. So once we enable the Drive API, we have to generate our credentials, client ID and client secret for the auth to flow. So we have to go to the API Access tab. In the API Access tab, we have a big blue button that says Create Auth to Client ID. It's pretty easy. We just click on that. We have to specify our product name. We can call it Drive Quick Start. It's up to you. Just a name, and if you want, you can add a product logo. This is just a sample. We don't have a logo, but you can add it later if you want. So I'm going to click Next. And then you have to select if you want a web application, a service account application, or an installed application.
Yes.
So what we're going to write today is a command line application,
That's
right?
correct. So in
iOS or other, which is everything else, and our is going to be other. It's going to be a command line application on .NET. So you click on Create Client ID, and you get your credentials, which are the client ID and client secret, which we're going to need in our application. They can be considered as username and password.
Yes, but for an
client ID can be, let's say, distributed around.
Yes.
I mean, other people can know about your client ID of your application. That's not secret. But a client secret is actually secret. So if it happens that other people get hold of your client secret, you have to revoke it and get a new one. You can do that at any time by going to the same page here and click on Reset Client Secret.
That's correct.
So let's say at the end of this talk, that's what I'm going to do.
Yes.
Okay.
And if you ever reset your
Otherwise, if you reset your client secret and you still have it in your code, the application will just break. The credentials will not be accepted. So let's go back to the docs, and we see that we've done the first step. It was very easy and very quick. So we enabled the Drive API, and we generated our credentials for an installed application. The second step, it's specific to the language of your choice, because it's the step on how to install the client library for the language of your choice. In our case, this is going to be .NET. There are similar instructions for other languages. The .NET one requires you to download a zip with a library and then reference some of those into your project. So there is a link to the core .NET library. We can just follow the link. It takes you to the download page.
The Drive API is a simple REST API. So if you already have an HTTP client and wants to go through the hassle of writing your own HTTP client, you can easily use the API. But we do have supported client libraries in many languages, and it's so much easier to use those. And our documentations are written targeted on those client libraries. So we recommend you using those client libraries in case there are bugs. They will be easily fixed by us, and they will always be up to date with our most recent APIs.
Perfect. So we go to we were brought to the Google API.NET Client library page, and what we want is the latest stable release. So we click on it, and we have the option to download the binary release, which includes the DLLs, the source files, or the samples. What we need here is the binary release. So we just click on this, and we're going to download the file. And it's done. This zip file, which I'm going to open now, will include two folders, one for the library, the core library, and the other one for the service. So let me extract this on my desktop just to be used later. So I'll copy this to my desktop here. You can obviously put the files wherever you want. And this will include many DLLs you won't need, because we are only going to use Drive. But if you check inside services, you will see a folder for each API you can use with this library. So what we're going to need is just Drive. And if you check lib, instead, you will see there's a number of libraries we're going to include in the next step. So let's go back to the documentation, and we're done with the second step. So the third step is to set up the sample. Those instructions are also specific for the language of your choice. So in .NET, we're going to create a new solution inside Visual Studio, and then we're going to use the code that's here. So let's start with creating a new solution in Visual Studio. So I have Visual Studio 2010 open. I can do new project and select console application. Let's call this Drive Quick Start. Obviously, you can call it as you want. I create a solution for this, and it's an empty solution, as you know. What we're going to do here to set up this is that we're going to make sure we target .NET Framework 3.5 or 4, not client profile. So we do right-click on the project and go to Properties. And the default framework for this solution was .NET Framework 4 client profile. We are going to change it to .NET Framework 4. 3.5 is also valid.
Yes. And I think the client library also supports 2.5.
Yes, with some caveats.
Yes.
So then we need to add references to the DLLs we want. So we can do add reference and select some of the DLLs we want. So let me browse the lib directory first. So they were on my desktop. So I can go to my desktop, and here there's a folder called lib. What we need is .NET OpenAuth. We need Google APIs Authentication Auth2. We need Google APIs, so we can start adding those. We also need a reference to the Drive service.
That's correct.
So we do add another reference. This is not here. It's in the service folder. So we go back here, go to services, and we need Drive. In the Drive service folder, you will find two DLLs for V1 and V2. This sample is for V2, which is mostly backward compatible to V1. There's just minor changes, but I mean, now you should always use V2 if you start a new project.
Yeah, V2 is a superset of V1 and has much more functionalities than V1. And if you already have code working on V1, it's easy to migrate. And we do have a migration guide on our documentation page.
Yeah, I think the migration from V1 to V2 is just two very easy steps.
Changing some attributes, names, and arguments.
Yeah. So let's go back to the code. So we have this empty page, but we can start from the code we have here. So we can take all of this, and then we will explain it line by line. So let me copy it. I will copy this and replace the content in my program.cs standard file. This is it.
And all set. No
We
errors.
can build the solution. Build succeeded. We can run it. Let's just add another line here. We're going to add it to the documentation. So this is going to be a command line application. So when you run it, it will authenticate and then upload a file to Drive
and close.
and close. So if you want to see the result, it's probably better if we do a console.read line here, so that we just wait for the user to press enter. And we need to add a file to be uploaded to Drive. So we're going to read from the folder that the executable is
Running
in.
from? Yeah.
So we can either manually add a file to the debug directory, whatever. But it's probably better if we add a file from here and make sure we copy it to the content folder. So we do add new item, and search for a text file. This file is called document.txt. If you want to use another file, of course, you can change it into the code. But if we want to use the code as it is and we want to follow the instructions step by step, the file has to be called document.txt. So we add it. We can write something like this is a test document, save, and then remember to make sure this file is copied to the output directory. So we can change this, the build rule to copy always. So now if we run this application, this file will be there. We just need another exercise, which is to set the credentials we generated from the Google APIs console.
Right
so
now, if you run the application,
it will just fail the authorization.
Yes.
Because credentials are not valid. We have two placeholders here for client ID and client secret. So we can go back to the APIs console and copy those values we generated. So we take the client ID and we replace this string here. And then we take the client secret and we replace that too. Now
I believe we're good to go.
Yeah. So this will run the command line application. See what happens. So I run and debug. The first thing we do is the authorization process. So the application tries to start a browser in your computer to give the user allow the user to approve the application.
That's correct.
So this application is requesting permission to view and manage the files and documents I have on Google Drive. If you want to know more details about what we are allowing the application to do, you can expand it and see a more detailed description. The name you see here is the name of the application, the project we created in the APIs console. So it's definitely my project. I can allow access to it.
And this is what the users of our application will see when they go through the authorization flow.
Yes. So since this is a command line application, this is not a web application, the flow is not the best for the user, as the users have to copy this code from here and pass it to the command line application.
Yes.
So I'm going to copy it from here, go back to my shell. As you can see, the application is running here and it's waiting for me to provide an authorization code, which is the code we just got from the flow. So I can put the code here. And what is going to happen next, assuming the authorization went well, and I'm pretty sure it did, the document.txt file is going to be uploaded to Google Drive. And the application will print the file ID. So whenever you upload a file to Google Drive, you get back some metadata, including the file ID, which is a unique ID. And the file upload was successful, and we got our file ID, which is a long string, and that's unique. So now the application is waiting for me to press enter to quit. That's it. The application worked. And if I go to my Drive, I see they have a new
file.
document called My Document, which was just created. And if I open it, it contains the text I put. This is test document. So it worked. But you might wonder why this is called My Document. I mean, the file was called document.txt. So let's go back to the code and check the code line by line. So in the code, we have two things to do. First, authorization. Second, use the Drive API to upload a file. The authorization can be complex. I mean, the auth flow can look complex if you don't know the details, but the library hides all the complexity from you. So it's basically these two lines here. You need to instantiate a provider and then authenticator.
Yes, and the library is also using .NET OpenAuth, which is an open source library supporting many type of authorization mechanism, including auth2, auth1, auth subs, and other protocols.
Yeah, so that library is basically the de facto standard for auth authorization in .NET. And so we decided not to reinvent the wheel and instead to use a standard library that almost everyone else uses. So we use this library, we extended it with our own Google-specific things. And so you need to instantiate a new native application client with your client ID and secret. Then that's where the credentials are used. And then you have to instantiate an auth authenticator. One of the things you have, one of the parameters you pass to the auth authenticator is a function called, in our case, called get authorization, which is the function that the library will automatically call when the flow has to be started. So if we go down, here is the get authorization method, which generates the authorization URL, spawns the browser, and waits for the user to enter the code. When that is done, it just works on processing the authorization with the code and the client ID and secret and all the other credentials you have, and that will return an object of which implements the authorization state interface, which is what we need to instantiate the service. So, in fact, if we go back to our main code, we can then instantiate a Drive service using the auth object we just got from the authentication. We're done with authorization. Second part, we have to upload a file to Drive.
Yes.
How do we do that? Uploading a file requires two parts, right?
Yes. So a file in Drive has two, as Claudia mentioned, has two parts: the metadata and the content. There are two types of files actually. Files that only contains metadata for applications who already has a database and wants to store the content on the database. They can simply create a shortcut on Drive, and the user will be able to see the files on their Drive and click and be redirected to the other applications. Otherwise, the other form is saving both metadata and content on Drive, and this will use the user's quota.
And this is exactly what we're doing here.
Yes.
So we're setting some metadata first, and then we're setting the content. As this is a sample, we basically hard-coded some metadata. So the title will always be my document.
Yes.
The description will always be a text document, and the MIME type will always be text plain.
And this is actually what we saw on your Drive.
Yes, exactly. Of course, if you want to generalize this and make a real application, you will have to set the title according to the real title, or give a user an option to select a title, and provide a description, if any, and obviously set the correct MIME type. So this application will always upload a text file to Drive, or assume that we're trying to upload a text file to Drive. But if you want, let's say, to upload a PDF, you have to replace the MIME type to application PDF instead of text plain. And this is all we need for the metadata, and then read the content. So we use standard system.io methods to read the content of a file from our file system. And here is where we see that the application uses document.txt. So if you want to obviously give the user an option to select a file, you have to make this dynamic. So instead of hard-coding the name of the file, you give the user an option to select a file. And read that in a byte array. And then it is just a single line of code to insert a request, to insert a file on Drive. So we have this insert media upload request object, which takes the metadata in the
Content.
as a byte stream and the file type, and then you can call upload on it. The upload will, when that returns, you will have a response body property. And the response body property will include all the metadata that is returned from Drive. And that includes the file title, the ID, the modified date, a lot of information. You can check what a file object is to see what you get. And eventually, before closing the application, we just print the file ID to show the application works, and we got some metadata back. And that's it. We just wait for the user to close, and we're done. So this main application, this command line application, it probably took 10 to 15 minutes to write.
Yes.
It does everything from scratch. Then it does authorization and uploading a file to Drive. But of course, you can do more now.
Yes. So the Drive API has many functionalities, such as inserting a files, as we just did, getting a list of files from the user. According to the scopes you choose to approve your application with, you get either the entire user's drive or only the files that the user has granted access to your application. You can also update files content, delete files, trash files, get revisions from files.
And a lot more things that are in the documentation. So, before we wrap up, let's just get back to the doc. So we explained how to build this application and how to run the sample, and we tried that. And what Alan is saying is covered in the next step section, which is the last section of the quick start. So you might want to expand this sample to do a lot more things. And another next step we might recommend is for you to check the real sample applications we have. So this is a very simple, basic application. With this, you get started with 5 minutes, and you have a working application. But if you want to do more, and you still need help on that, in the documentation we have a section for example applications.
Yes.
So if you click on that, you will see that we have a sample application that is called Dredit or Dr. Edit. We will eventually decide what the right name is. It's a text editor that uses Drive to store files. And we have a tutorial for 5 languages. Well, still 6 now. Well, Go is coming. And so, for instance, if you're still using .NET, you might want to check Dr. Edit for .NET. And that is going to be a more complex application. It's a ASP.NET MVC application, so it's a web application that takes care of everything, all the edge cases in authorization.
Integrates with the Drive UI.
Integrates with the Drive UI. And it's a more complex sample, but if you get started with the quick start, then this should be very easy to understand. And all the code is here. The project can be downloaded from the repository, and it is basically explained line by line. So it should be very easy to understand. And of course, you might still have questions.
Yes, so if you have questions, we'll be looking for them on Stack Overflow under the Google-Drive-SDK tag.
Okay, perfect. I think that's it for today. I hope you liked learning how to build your first Drive application with .NET, and we'll see you next time.
Yes, but it was easy.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.